Hi, everybody. Hold on, let's share a screen. Look at this. There's a screen over here I can share with you. It's amazing. How does that work? Matt Feldman. I'm with this is the IC Topic Chats. Today is May 22nd, and we are 1 week away from 5 years of doing these darn things, the IC Topic Chats. And so that's an exciting thing. We were originally going to have a session on artificial intelligence today, but we kind of did artificial intelligence last week. So we decided to kind of push that off until for a couple months. And I moved up a session that I've been kind of dying to get my head around, something I think that we talk about, but not directly. It's something that comes up in a lot of different sessions. And it's about that weird space of budget proposals. What is it like to be in a budget proposal? What do you do? How do you think about these things? And I started this, I've done different versions of this and I've incorporated it with different presentations. And I started the day off going, what do I want to talk about that I've already talked about? What do I want to talk about that's new? And so somehow I ended up thinking about horses. And I know that sounds really crazy, but I did. And so next thing you know, I'm thinking about, well, not seahorses. That was just, I typed into Google search, horse meme. That's all I typed in and this popped up. And I thought, well, that's funny. So let's go with that. So I want to start us off by thinking about that delicate art of budget proposals by thinking about who we might end up in a room or a virtual room, as it seems to be these days, with who might be potential clients. Who are these people that we need to have this delicate conversation with? And so I like to think about this with regards to two key variables: their understanding for evaluation and their budget. So on their budget, it can be either low or high. What's low, what's high? Well, I guess that's up to interpretation. For some people, $15,000 might be a high budget. For most of us, that might be a low budget. And their understanding for evaluation, again, that's also up for interpretation. But in many ways, that's an understanding for why they're having this conversation with you to begin with. Either they really understand why they're there with you, or they're like, well, it was there's a whole paragraph in this RFP that I'm responding to that says I need an evaluator, and I don't even know what that is, and I found you. So that might be the low understanding. And so I started to think about this. How do you approach different situations when you have people in each of these different quadrants? So let's start off at the bottom. You've got the first situation where you have a low budget and a low understanding. And I'm actually going to have whole slides dedicated to each one of these. I'm going to call these people workhorses. I'm also going to say there's a potential that these are mules, but we'll get into that in a second. The next one I want to talk about is people with a big budget, but with almost no understanding for why they need an evaluator. These are wild stallions because they're wild cards. You don't really know what you're doing. They may not know why they're involved with you, but they know they have to spend a lot of money or they have a lot of money to spend. They're not necessarily, this doesn't happen that often, but they do come along from time to time. Then you've got people who have a low budget, but a really high understanding for program evaluation. And I call this the purebred pony because there's a lot of potential here, but it's not there yet. And then in the upper right-hand corner, we've got the unicorns because they understand what they want. You probably have been working with them for a while. It's probably rare that you're just going to walk into a room with a unicorn who just gets you, you get them, and all of a sudden you click and they want to give you a whole lot of money. But it does happen. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the workhorses. So here's a description. Most of the time, they're kind of less than ideal. There's going to be a lot of work involved with this. They are, quite honestly, how most of us get started. And if I'm going to look back at most of my projects, I would say 60 to 80% of our projects, if I'm being completely honest with myself, they're workhorse projects. And workhorse, there's nothing wrong with that because in many ways, you learn how to do them, you do them well, you create a relationship, but you've got to focus on a couple things with these types of clients. And we're going to get into the negotiation piece too. You need to understand at the early end, are these going to be mules or workhorses? Okay. And I talk a little bit about mules in a couple of slides. Is this going to be worth my time? Can I work with them to develop a larger project down the road? Will I be able to convince them that evaluation is worth it for them, that they're going to buy into our process? Are they going to provide the data? Are they going to give me access to the data? Are they going to help me put together my focus groups? Whatever it is, however I decide to do my data collection. So those are the sorts of things you need to be considering when you're talking to them. Um, when you go into this negotiation and it's talking about budgets and proposals and projects and things like that, you're going to have to be very careful to explain things in their terms and talk about it from their value and make sure you're not overcommitting because they might ask you to do things and you're like, oh, sure, I can do that. And then you find out you've overcommitted and you perhaps set yourself up for scope creep down the road. These are ideal for early consultants, new consultants. We do have workhorse clients for sure. And when we bring people in, oftentimes they take on the workhorse projects because they're kind of set. We understand how they work. We can slot people in and out of them. And it's a good way to learn our program evaluation business before you get into the sophisticated stuff. Um, Economies of scale are key here. So in our world, the National Science Foundation projects that are related to like STEM and NOIS, those um, those are projects that we have several of. We understand how to do them. We know how to kind of to do it. So the economy of scale. We've done a survey for another client that we can incorporate and change and develop for a survey that makes sense for this new client that we bring in. All right, let's talk about another kind. How about the wild stallion? These are people with that high budget, but they really don't understand why they need program evaluation. So this is a client that has great potential if, and this is the big question, if you can show them your value. You've got to ask yourself, you got to ask yourself a couple questions. Does this fit who I am? Will they get program evaluation? How long is it going to take to bring them along this path to program evaluation and its value to them, to their long-term outcomes, what they're trying to do. So you're going to need, like in the last situation, similarly, you're going to need a careful explanation of the use of the evaluation in their terms and how you can be a great value to their project. Prognosis, don't mess this up. Don't get bucked off the stallion. Make sure you're scheduling lots, and I mean lots of time because they're spending lots of money perhaps for meetings and communication when you're thinking about how to scope this out. All right, let's move on to the purebred pony. So here's somebody who knows a lot about program evaluation, but they have like this little teeny budget. And so do they have that capacity to grow into the unicorn? That's the question you're going to be asking yourself. Is this going to be worth my time for this small amount of money? Again, do they have that capacity to grow? You need to do a deep dive into your common understandings for their needs. If they understand program evaluation, they're probably going to come in saying, I know you really can't do this, but you need to listen, ask questions, try and poke in and understand what they're going to need. And perhaps, they've got a pretty good sense for what you could and should be doing. And you just need to make sure, again, you don't allow them to push you into that scope creep or overcommitting situation. Be a great project and long-term opportunity. But again, you need to understand whether you're going to be able to turn this pony into a unicorn. And then you're in that unicorn situation where you have this high budget, high understanding for program evaluation. These are what you'd consider an ideal client. Michael Michalowicz wrote a whole book on growing your pumpkin. This is the prize pumpkin at the state fair. This is the reason why we do this work. Oftentimes we say to ourselves, how did I get so lucky to work with such a great client? They just get me and I get them. This is perfect. How do I get into a deep dive to really meet their needs? This is similar to the last situation. You're going to have that same consideration for how we're going to listen and talk. So you're going to deep dive into their common understanding. You need to listen, ask questions, let them do the talking. Again, make sure you understand what you're getting yourself into here. This is the client you've been working to find. Congratulations, you found your unicorn. This is where you want to invest your time and energy. So you want to win this client, obviously, because this is the dream situation. But this is also where you want to spend your time. If you have limited amounts of time, try and figure out this client, because if you can replicate this opportunity, this is why you're in the business to do what you're doing. And then you've got the mule. Okay, so these are your uncooperative headaches. Any of our clients, but particularly our workhorses, could turn into mules. They're unresponsive. You're asking yourself, how did I get myself into this situation? If you're negotiating with somebody you think is a mule, ask yourself your question why you're even taking this meeting. I would limit your exposure to people who you are considering mules. And there's a lot of current clients you have that may come back to you and say, I'd love to do some more work with you. And they're mules, and you go to yourself, you've got to not be tempted to take on more work with the mules, because you're going to suffer, and you're not going to have as much time to work towards or work with your unicorns or your purebred ponies. Okay, that's the first equine version of the presentation. Now I'm going to ask questions that I think you might be asking yourself. So, how do I prepare for a first meeting with a potential client? First question you have to ask yourself is this a good fit for me? Don't take the meeting with a client that's not a good fit for you. Because you could find yourself in a situation where either you're getting paid too little to do too much, or you're getting paid quite a bit of money to do something you don't like. So think about who this client potential is. Go back to your versions of these different clients in your head. How do they fit into that grid that I shared? Make sure you're researching who they are, what organization they work with. Understand that. I made a mistake just the other day, and I know this seems like a minor one, but I called Culver Stockton College by a university. And I remember in the middle of this meeting going, I know better. Why did I just use that? I know they're a college. And trust me, in the university college world, if you're a college, you're very aware that you're a college and a university. So I know I made that mistake, but that's the little things you should understand. So what's that context of the conversation that you're going to be having? Who are you talking to? Are you talking, for me, I work with a lot of universities. Am I talking to a provost? What's going on in their world? Am I talking to a director of institutional research? Am I talking to a university faculty member who's writing a grant, right? So these are certainly different people with different perspectives. Am I talking to the vice president for advancement? Trust me, they're about getting the money in the door. What is their motivation? And understanding their motivation is a big piece of this. Make sure you understand the opportunity, meaning what are they trying to do? For me, a lot of meetings I take, I'm going to take one tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. They're writing grants, and they would like an evaluator to support the proposal process. They don't have the money yet. It's like sometimes you're working with a foundation. I don't have much experience with this. The foundation knows what they want, or they think they know what they want, and they'd like to work with you to do program evaluation. Perhaps they're ready to create a contract and get you working within weeks, months, soon. For me, we're writing a proposal, and then we're going to say a little prayer, and about 3 weeks after we forgot we wrote the proposal, we'll find out whether it was funded or not. That's my situation. That's my opportunity, and I understand that. Get a rough idea of the amount of work it's going to take, and what that will cost, right? So you should be prepared to discuss what you're going to do in whatever amount of context you understand. If you don't know in advance, feel free to email them. What are some things that you're thinking about? Do you have a scope of work? Do you have an idea for what you're thinking? Do you have a proposal that you've started that I can take a look at so I can be prepared for a meeting? I wouldn't send it ahead of time, but I would prepare a brief cost sheet or description that you may want to discuss or share during the meeting. I wouldn't put that ahead. I wouldn't get ahead of yourself with showing them dollars just because you don't really know what they need. You don't want to share something that you have to pull back. All right, that's the preparation part. How do I turn this conversation into a commitment? So this is the context of the meeting. You're going to prepare this proposal or a presentation or a talk, or you're going to want to discuss who you are and why they're spending time talking to you, right? So you're going to start the meeting. There's going to be the introductions. You're going to talk about who's there, and then you need to listen. Ask them the questions. Learn more about why they need an evaluator. What's in the RFP? How have you come to this place where we're having this meeting today? And this is going to be important also for you to understand where they are in that context of the grid, right? Are we dealing with a unicorn here? Are we dealing with a workhorse? Share some ideas and then listen. And if you see the word listen a lot here on this slide, that's for a reason, because you should be listening and not talking. Listen some more, repeat back what they said, make relevant comments to what they said, and then suggest how your work can support their ideas. You basically, this is like, I don't know, it's consulting 101. Put the value for what they're trying to do first, right? It's not about what you can do. It's about how you can support their big idea, whatever that may be. After that meeting, you're going to write up some notes, and then you send a proposal to them, right? An MOU. I've got examples of this. Feel free to reach out if you don't have the MOU template. We've put it out there several different times. And that will signal their intent to work with you. So oftentimes, like for instance, tomorrow, we're going to be talking to a provost at a university, and they're likely talking to other evaluators just like Goshen or similar to Goshen. Could be some of you guys who are even on the call today. In fact, very likely. We're going to talk about how we could support them in writing for this National Science Foundation grant proposal. And then we will have an agenda just for ourselves. We're not sharing it with them. It's just for our own notes. So we know what's going on and what are the things that we want to make sure we cover during the meeting. And then when it's over, we will send them an MOU. And about a week later, follow up if they haven't gotten back to you. Sometimes they need the prompt because just like you, they're busy. I know. If this sounds really elementary, it's kind of is, but if it sounds brand new to you, welcome to consulting. This is the sort of things that we do. How do I suss out their evaluation budget? Very simply, you ask the question, what have you budgeted for your evaluation? If that feels uncomfortable, go stand in front of a mirror by yourself and practice saying the question, what have you budgeted for your evaluation? Now, they're not always going to say the answer, right? Maybe they don't know, and we're going to get to that. But frequently they have. And sometimes they've budgeted a lot more. Perhaps you're working with a wild stallion or a unicorn who has a big budget and you didn't know that before you walked in there. So you do just need to ask the question. And it's uncomfortable at first, but frankly, how are we ever going to get to the point of getting a project where they're going to pay us unless we know what their budget is? So what if they won't tell me their evaluation budget? So this is where we start this give and take conversation, right? We start to suggest options. We say, okay, so what I'm hearing is, I think you might need me to do, and then you start putting out some of those ideas, right? Perhaps I should collect data on this one thing that you're talking about, and we'll do a survey, and we'll survey the faculty and all the people involved with your project across the 15 different institutions you're working with. We're going to survey your students twice a year, a pre and a post, whatever it is. Use your evaluation knowledge to understand what you think should happen and just kind of do this give and take so that you can get a sense for what they think you should be doing. You'll also understand at this point whether you're dealing with like a workhorse where you have to bring the evaluation expertise to them and they're just going to let you do it, or if you're dealing with one of the other kind of scenarios. I usually at this point, if they have like no idea, if I know what I've charged for similar clients, I'll say, for that kind of project, I'm just using this example. In our most recent projects we've started, the budget was between, I don't know, 18,000 and 22,000 per year, typically a 5-year project. That's a typical kind of thing that I would do, and that would be like our workhorse kind of client. That's something I would say, and just to see how they react. If they're not even going to go there, I'll say, well, we're going to start off by putting together a proposal with our basic minimum, right? And that's going to be, here's the things you absolutely have to get done. And then there are things that you can choose. And so that would be considered the cafeteria, like you're walking through with your tray and you're like, yes, I'll have some Jell-O. I'll have some green beans. I'll have some focus groups over here. I'll take a survey of my students. That's the cafeteria plan. Cadillac is similar. Cadillac is this idea where you're building a car and you keep adding features. Same kind of idea, but you do need to have a basic car. You need your basic Ford Escort to get started, and then you can build that up to a Cadillac. Those are different ways to put things in. It's nice because oftentimes you'll start off thinking, well, they only want the basic minimum, and then they end up adding up to a Cadillac. It happens a lot. When they're not giving you any idea and they're playing the stone face with you, like about how much budget they have, guess a little high. Think if you think it's going to take 30 hours a year for communication, I would put in 40, because you just don't know. They're not giving you any feedback. So I guess a little high. And if my budget ends up being a little high, okay, I'll take it. More times than not, that's not going to be the thing that loses it for me. All right, next question. What if they ask how I calculated my budget? And here's exactly, I wrote this down earlier. Here's what I would say. We have a completely transparent process. I say this almost every time I meet with a potential client. After I learn what's needed for this project, I estimated the time needed to do this project based on similar projects we've already done. We keep time and toggle. I look at those things. We reflect on those on an annual basis. So then we take this time to do those types of projects against our billing rate, which is that a certain amount per hour. Then I add in any additional expenses like costs for travel or software, and presto, I have a budget. The piece is transparent because I share with them if they want to know. They usually don't, but if they want to know, hey, we want to do this many focus groups, we want to do this amount of communication, and it's just an Excel spreadsheet. Activity, when we intend to do it, Q1 of 2026, 15 hours, billing rate, cost. They can see it if they want to see it. Sometimes they do. Usually the fact that I offer it to them, they go, oh, that's great. And then they don't care, as long as it doesn't exceed a certain amount and they feel like they're getting the value. So this is all demonstrating value back to them. What if they ask about how I calculated my hourly rate? And this is exactly what I say to them. I calculate my hourly rate using a calculation I learned, quite frankly, here in these IC topic chats or in the workshops. I learned it from Gail Barrington, and then I've repeated it maybe 1,000 times. I've learned how to calculate my rate from my peers in the American Evaluation Association. And if anybody's curious, we'll send you the link on how to do this. We just had it about 6 weeks ago. I know that this cost is relevant to market prices based upon the surveys the ICTIG does, the Independent Consulting Topical Interest Group. My rate is this amount per hour, and the range for independent consultants in North America is between 120 and 180 per hour based upon that survey. Now, if your rate is more than 180, you might want to keep that last little sentence out of there and just say, I know it's relevant because of my experience and how awesome I am. And I've clearly demonstrated that from this conversation so far. I had another question that I was going to write down that I didn't put in there. And I think this is an interesting scenario. So I'm just going to go to the next slide so you're not still looking at this one. The question is, what if they come in with this super high budget and they offer it to me and I'm sitting there going, okay, what am I supposed to do? Like, I feel like saying hallelujah, oh my God, I finally found them. But they're high budget, low understanding, and they're ready to give you, I don't know, $500,000 to do a project that might realistically cost you $50,000. I'm going to say tread carefully on this one because this is a situation that could end up being a problem. I don't have a horse equine example for this, but you might find yourself in a situation where you're getting overpaid for something. So you got to be careful that you're thinking about how you're doing the things that are going to provide that value back to them, because down the road, they might decide you're no longer worth that big number of dollars and they could just cut you out. So that's a situation you don't want to find yourself in. Make sure you're demonstrating clearly the value on a regular basis. So you need to make sure you're actively engaged with those folks. And you're having that conversation up front as much as you possibly can, and that they can connect value to activities to dollars, right? So, all right, with that, next week, we're gonna have a special session, and let me make sure I'm pulling it up. You guys can see it on my screen here, but I'm gonna pull it over here so I can read it and you don't have to look at my crazy text. We're going to have Sheila Robinson for our 5-year anniversary of IC Topic Chats. She's going to do her session on expertise to impact, designing workshops and courses that make a difference. And I asked Sheila to come in for our 5-year anniversary. It's actually 5 years plus 1 day because we started on May 28th, 2020, in the middle of the pandemic. And Sheila's done a lot of things. She's very well known within AEA. She did the AEA 365 for as many years as I can remember. And she's just a very special, wonderful presenter. And I'm excited to see what to involve her with our group. So I hope you're able to make that. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop the recording and we'll go into the open-ended questions. We'll just go into the chat function of the whole thing. So everybody out there on YouTube land, we'll see you later. Everybody else who's live right now, stick around.